Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar at Yale on a rainy, cool afternoon in New Haven to talk about getting the gig with Betsy Atkins, the author of her new book, Be On, Be Board Ready. And she is going to share with us all some really practical insights on how she has served on more than 30 boards, public boards, and steps to get there, but focusing on personal brand development and how you actually get on a gig. So first of all, I thank you for joining us, and I thank Jeff Sonnenfeld for introducing us to Betsy and inviting her to do this. The purpose of today is just to get these practical insights to help us in the context of a board seat search. And we have on watching the webinar today some recent alums from the Yale Women on Boards program, for which Jeff Sonnenfeld is faculty director, as well as some people who are considering being on or who are going to be in the program. And so they're in the beginning of stages of getting organized for launching their board seat search. Before we start, a few logistical things to keep in mind. If you have questions, you can send them via your chat screen to us during the talk. We're going to have Betsy answer some questions that came in beforehand, but we will have a Q&A afterwards. So we've taken some of the earlier questions to kind of address the topics, the goals of the webinar first, but we would love to have your questions for her, and what a great opportunity to ask someone who's served on so many boards to get your questions answered. A little bit about Betsy's bio first. She's a 3-time CEO, a serial entrepreneur, and the founder of Baja Corporation. She's co-founded enterprise software companies in multiple industries, including energy, healthcare, and networking. She's an expert at scaling companies through hyper-growth stages and leading them through successful IPOs. She's done 13 and acquisitions. And one of her more notable IPOs includes the acquisition of Clear Standards by SAP and Ascend Communications, $5 billion in revenue, and which was then acquired by Lucent for $23 billion. So she's had some really amazing experience in that, among other companies. She's a corporate governance expert with an eye for making boards really realize their competitive advantage and make the boards be a competitive asset for their company. She currently serves on public company boards, Wynn Resorts, SL Green Realty, and Covitris. She's also a member of the board of Volvo Cars, which is a private company, and she'd be happy to field questions on either kinds of company boards. She's a proud graduate of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And with that, we're going to get going on questions for Betsy. And thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to hear the answers to some of the questions that people so thoughtfully sent in beforehand on developing a personal brand. So maybe just before we get started, I mean, you've served on so many boards, and yet you're still focused on cultivating and keeping your personal brand fresh. When is it ever done? Do you stop, and why are you still doing this? I mean, keeping the brand management thing going.
Well, thanks for the invitation. It's great to be with you, and hello to the audience out there. I'm a big believer that you're always having to refresh, keep current, and iterate on who you are, what your brand messaging is. It's a very noisy environment out there. There are so many channels of communication between all of the social media, blogging, writing, TV, radio, podcast. It's an endless barrage of communication. Just as an opening thought to the audience, what I hope you'll get out of this is really, what are the practical steps to getting the gig? How do you get into the boardroom? Because it's opaque, it's Byzantine, it's not obvious. And there's a lot of channels and a lot of ways to get there. And having now, I think about 30 or 31 public boards and a little over 60 private that were either private equity or venture capital backed, I've kind of figured out what I think is a formula that works, and I want to share those secrets and insights and those learnings with you. And that's really why I wrote the book. The book is my third one. It's Be Board Ready, and it really lays out the how to message yourself and brand yourself, and what are the channels and how to get there. So anyhow, so your question was, is branding ever done? Is messaging ever done? No, it isn't, because you're still growing, you're still changing. What the world and what the marketplace and what the boardroom is looking for is changing. And you're going to want to be able to articulate, why are you relevant? What is it that you bring? What's the unique perspective that you're going to bring to move this company forward? Because you need to be an asset and an accelerant, not just oversight. That's kind of table stakes, like brushing your corporate teeth. You don't want to have bad corporate breath. Of course, you're going to do an audit committee and a comp committee and a governance committee. That's oversight. That's not enough anymore.
Right. It absolutely is not. One of the alums from our programs recently said to us, I can't believe we're all just starting to think about our personal brands. We should have been doing this all our careers. But it's particularly relevant now that people, and most of the people in the audience here, are early in the stages of marketing themselves for these board seats. And here's the book. You have a whole chapter devoted to personal brand development. So that says something right there. A book on being on boards, and it's so important that you're devoting a whole chapter. So, keeping the audience in mind here, can you talk a little bit about what advice would you give people who are really early in the phase? Who they're aspiring directors to get their personal brand out there. There's so many channels today. It's not only a different board director's role today, but it's a different environment in which, you can get your word out there. It's always been sort of a black box. People haven't understood how they get invited to be on a board, but now there are all these channels on top of it. So it's just getting more complex. So what advice do you have for these people who are just about to go into this totally different world, process where they have so many choices, and they're just starting out as aspiring directors?
So for the aspiring director, I think first of all, you have to distill down what are your skills and what is the perspective you're going to bring. So think about it. Are you a chief financial officer, a chief marketing officer, a division president who's a general manager, global head of logistics and supply chain? So think about what is your functional skill. Think about what is your industry domain expertise. Maybe you're from healthcare, you're from financial services, consumer packaged goods. So you've got your one vector is your functional skill, where you've spent your career. Another vector is your domain or industry knowledge. And the third thing that you don't often think about, but what is very important to boards is, what size entity are you skilled at? Are you great at the 50 million to 200 million journey? Are you somebody who is terrific at the sort of 2 billion to 5 billion? Have you been on global multinational companies? Because that's the journey that different companies at different stages in their life are going to go through. And you want to pattern match and be able to bring a perspective. So for example, if you're a little startup that's a venture-backed company, and that's a board you're going to go on, and you've been on the board of, and you've been a senior exec in Procter & Gamble and Nestle your whole career, well, that's a giant CPG global multinational, which is 50 billion in revenue. That may not translate to a small company that's 50 million. So you need to pattern match the scale of the enterprise and where they are in their journey. Maybe you're great at turnarounds. And so you'd bring that deep knowledge to a turnaround that could be a private equity company board. But being great at turnarounds would not be a great match for a hyper growth company, unicorn from Silicon Valley. So you need to think about, what are your strengths, distill it down, be able to sort of really boil it down and message it you've heard the expression, I'm sure, the elevator pitch. Well, you're riding the elevator from the first to the 30th floor. You've got to have a slogan that's an elevator pitch that distills who you are, what your perspective is, and the strength that you're going to bring. And then after that, you know, we can talk about, well, how do you message that outside and what are the channels?
Right. Well, thank you for that. Earlier, while we were just getting set up here, I asked you a question that so many of the people who take our program ask, you know, do I need to focus on the industry that I worked in, so to get a board seat? And well, if you're picking all of your specialties and narrowing it down to, you know, all these other parameters that you think, you know, that you add value in, how do they broaden out? I mean, if someone is in an industry, maybe it's a very small industry, can they pursue a board seat elsewhere outside their industry? I mean, how do they broaden their search too? It's kind of a digression because I was going to ask something else from a question that was sent to me.
So let's think about your industry background and where it's applicable. So you're a new aspiring director. And you should think about the boards that you could be a great fit for. And it could be, for example, we'll use healthcare. You're from the healthcare industry and you're a vice president of marketing from Pfizer. So you have large cap background, you have pharmaceutical background, and you have marketing background. Now, that wouldn't mean that you're only going to be a fit for the board of, another healthcare industry company. You could be a fit because of your great marketing skills and background, or you could be a fit in healthcare, but for an earlier stage, smaller company where your domain expertise and really understanding big pharma and how multinationals function is very valuable for a healthcare, in my hypothetical, a healthcare IT services company. So you're an IT services company selling tailored software to the healthcare industry. So the fact that you come from a big pharma company is very valuable because you know the type of software that is valuable, what is the messaging and the positioning of the language, the secret speak of the pharma industry. So you can be applicable to multiple industries, going horizontal, your functional expertise as a chief marketing officer in our example, or industry domain knowledge, which is valuable to outside of healthcare. We gave a tech startup, healthcare IT services, and where they want your domain expertise. So there's lots of vectors to take it, but the key thing is, how do you tell the story? How do you message it? How do you distill this down, and how do you go about communicating who you are and what you bring?
Okay, thank you for that. So a question that came in is, okay, well, there's so many channels out there, digital, social channels. And, you know, in addition to that, well, they didn't exist 5-10 years ago. I mean, are these social channels even viable channels to getting a gig? I mean, are these really part of the path? Can you tell us a little bit about how you've used them and how effective are they? Is it all word of mouth? I mean, the inside scoop, if you will, 10 years ago was you had to know somebody, and it was, just a phone call. Are social channels really effective, and which ones are most effective, especially for the aspiring director?
So I think that you absolutely have to have a social identity and presence. And I think that it's table stakes now. So of course you would have your information on LinkedIn, and then you would likely look at additionally maybe having a presence on Twitter, possibly. You might use social media, which would be Facebook, Instagram, Snap. You might try and publish and blog and have, thought pieces and content either that you create or that you reference other really insightful thought pieces that you learn from. Because otherwise, how do you communicate in this noisy world we're in who you are and what you bring? You need to do the work. Finding a board opportunity requires, like any other thing that you're going to do in your career, it's a business development work. It's a funnel of prospects, and it's a pipeline of opportunities that you cultivate and you prosecute and you follow up on and you keep working on. And, I think it's also important to look at having your own website. There's lots of do-it-yourself websites like Wix, and there's a long list of them. And then there's resources out there like Advisory Cloud, which will keep all your social media aligned. So what you put on your, Betsy Atkins website from Wix, and then what I put out on LinkedIn, and what I put out on Facebook, and what I put out on Twitter, keeping all that information updated when I publish something or when I get a new gig on a private venture capital backed board. How do you, it's a lot of work. So there are resources like this Advisory Cloud to keep everything updated and current. So there's, you have to be willing to put in energy, like anything that's desirable. It does not typically fall from heaven into your lap.
Right. So having your own website sounds like a great thing, because no matter where you go, you can always drive people to that point, which is really the best way for you to begin an exchange with someone who might be interested in your thoughts and maybe eventually talking. And so you mentioned a couple times how noisy it is out there. So once people see something about you, whatever channel it is, how have you in the past motivated these various people through the channels to actually introduce you as a candidate for a board seat? I mean, that's a big step. I mean, they see you, they know something about you. How do you get invited to be introduced to somebody? Tell us about that.
So there's a lot of channels, of which, the web channels, your personal website, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, so you do get outreach from that. And I have gotten opportunities directly from that. But, it's also how people reference you. They're going to look you up, and they're going to want to see, what do you look like? What do you sound like?
Right.
Because your personality and persona comes through, right? And, are you animated? Are you super serious? Are you deeply analytical? Who are you? Because boards work on chemistry, and there's lots of people to choose from. So, having a digital presence is part of the vetting that people look at. So I think that it's not just a lead source. It's a process of when people introduce you, because there's many channels, and we'll talk about those different channels. So I wouldn't say that the digital presence is per se your main lead generating channel. It may be part of it, but it's more important for how people will investigate who you are and do their research on you as they meet you.
Okay.
All the other direct marketing channels that I think are worth exploring here.
Okay, you mentioned lead generation. How do you do that? What's a good way to generate leads, so to speak?
So I think that I would think about who is the ecosystem that surrounds the boardroom. Well, let's see. It's the outside general counsel, so it's the law firms.
Okay.
It is the outside typically accounting firms. So there's the big four, and then the other, large boutique firms. It's the comp consultants, the bankers. So here we have four big channels, and then it's your colleagues around the boardroom. And when you look at each of those channels, there's a lot of work to doing that. And of course, there's the search firms. And there's the women's groups that help women get on board. There's a long laundry list of them now, thank goodness. And there's directly, your outreach to your boss, to your peers, to your own network. These are all channels, and you ought to be very organized and actually write out a plan, like anything that you wanted to do. I would write out a little business plan and identify each channel. And of course, then there's investor channels. There's the private equity, there's the venture capital, there's the
Okay.
bankers, there's the attorneys,
Okay.
there, the comp consultants, there's the
Okay.
big four accounting firms, there's the governance groups, there's the women's groups, there's the search firms. There's a lot of channels, and each one
Lots of
needs
doors.
to be cultivated and developed, because you're not going to have a robust pipeline of opportunities, and you're doing this from a dead start, right? You're starting out, and you've got to fill this funnel and get yourself known out there, and you've got to put in the time. And it's an organized, thoughtful outreach, in my opinion, if you want to get success.
And just a really quick question. How long do you think it takes to go through this whole plan that you just described? Like a couple of months, a couple of years, what are we talking about here in timelines?
I think that is probably 9 to maybe 12 to 18 months to get your board gig. I think that there are some that happen sooner. And I think that you should, at a minimum, look at private, for-profit, corporate boards. And
let's talk about that. Yeah.
That buckets into two big categories. Let's talk about that. Okay. So
Tell us about how you connect with the private equity and the venture capital firms, which I'm sure you did as an early stage serial entrepreneur and IPO expert. You probably worked with them a lot. So how do you even connect with them and get them to consider you to be on their boards, the private company boards?
Well, let's diagnose what you just said. Why does private equity or venture capital have a potential interest in you as a board candidate? And how do you find them? And how do you engage with them? So first of all, they're all busy, and so are you. And so why would they even want to meet with you? You've got to be able to bring something to them that's going to be helpful for their portfolio companies. And I always think of relationships as a 3-to-1 ratio. You ought to assume that you have to forward deposit 3 actual proof points that you're valuable and helpful before you make an ask. If you just go and beat down the door of a private equity or venture capitalist and they take the meeting, they're going to be looking for, where's the value for me in meeting you? So I think on a first meeting or 2 or 3, you ought to be prepared to do something to help them. You shouldn't go into this meeting saying, I am a water walking goddess and I'm phenomenal and here's what I'm going to do for you. You ought to go into the meeting with the mindset of, what can I learn from you? How does your business work? And how can I help you in your business and your portfolio companies? And you should be willing to do some favors to try and help those portfolio companies. So you would look at that venture capitalist or private equity person, and you would do your homework. What are their portfolio companies? Which ones do they sit on the board of? Because they will have, 8 to 12 partners. They don't know what they're, which partners are on which boards. And back in our example earlier, now we'll do a new one. You're a financial services industry person, and you're a CFO from a financial services company. So the venture or private equity person, who you're going to meet with, that somebody has graciously made the introduction to, you should do your homework. What boards are they serving on? What industry do they tend to invest in? What type of company? And how can you help 1 or 2 of those portfolio companies that they're involved with? Can you, you're a chief financial officer in financial services in this example, can you coach their CFOs? If you don't have an industry match, if they happen to not be financial services investors, maybe you can functionally help. What can you do to help their companies help them in their career? Because if you don't know somebody and you just go in and ask for favors, I don't think that most people are motivated to spend their relationship capital helping a stranger, because they don't know if you're capable, if you follow up, if you follow through, if you put out the effort. And by forward investing on the 3-to-1 ratio, you do 3 things to help them. You've at least proven that you're responsive, responsible, competent, you care, you'll put out the effort. I'd be a lot more motivated to help someone who did that.
Sure. And so, I mean, it's pretty safe to assume, what do they want from you? Well, what do they want? They want to make money from their companies in their portfolio. You mentioned something else. I mean, what else do you think would be a good hook for them, that you might be able to say? I mean, you suggested coaching their CFO. I mean, they need operator expertise, right? So I guess you figure out the portfolio companies, what kind of expertise they need. But what can you give us some examples of what might make them love what you have to offer their company, their
So
companies?
So look at yourself and assess what your background and skills are. Remember, we
Mm-hmm.
talked about the big stages of difference in a company. You could be a
Okay.
hyper growth company, so super high growth could be your background. You
Mm-hmm.
could have come from turnarounds, which are low
Mm-hmm.
growth, large cap, legacy, or multinationals.
Mm-hmm.
You could have come from a particular industry. So you should be able to look at those kinds of things. And let's say, in our next example, you're a consumer packaged goods background person.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
so you're in a company that, has gone through some cost takeout and turnaround. Then you're not going to be a great match for the venture capital, which are early stage. But you would be a great match for private equity, which tends to have a model of cost takeout and turnaround and acquisition roll up and integration. So look at what you've done and look at their portfolio, and then be able to say, well, I'd love to help you in, Mr. or Ms. Private Equity Investor, and some of the things I've learned in cost takeout and turnarounds, which, is not industry specific. It would apply to the, 8 portfolio companies that you serve on the board of, Mr. or Ms. Private Equity Investor. And I'm really great at cost takeout, or I'm great at post-merger integration. And I see that these other companies, because this is typical of private equity, that they grow companies by acquisition, roll up, and cost takeout. So you've got to be able to see where you can be helpful, because otherwise, why do they want to do that? And by the way, if you're not the fit, offer to introduce them to people who are the fit.
Okay.
Be
Great
generous.
example of a favor. I was going to ask you, what kind of favors would be helpful? You want to, be of value to them.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
They're busy and they don't know you from Adam. And why should they recommend you? You have to prove yourself.
Yep. Okay. So let's say you have proven yourself to them. They see you're valuable. They think, we should talk to this person. Let's bring this person in. What do you do to prepare for that interview? And what might you do to plan what you tell them? I mean, what I'm getting from you already is that you probably don't want to say, I've accomplished this and I've accomplished this. It's more like it's all about them, basically. You have to find out about where the pain points are and how what you know how to do is going to fix what they have to do. But tell us more in your experience.
So now we're to the point where you get your at-bat. You're coming in to interview for an opportunity, let's say in a private equity or a venture capital-backed company, or a public company. So you've got your at-bat. You, of course, are going to do incredible research on the company. What's their industry? Who are their competitors? So you'll look at all the market intelligence. You'll look at McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Booz, Accenture, BCG. You'll also look at the market research. You'll look at Gartner, Forrester. You'll look at the analyst reports on the company and the peers and the competitors. So you'll come in and demonstrating you understand their competitive landscape, that you understand their business model, that you understand, what are the different current innovations, what are future innovations, what do the thought leaders say about the industry. So you'll come in knowledgeable. You'll know about the person you're meeting. You'll have done your research on them, on the social media and whatever is out there in YouTube and anything else. And you'll come in with an organized list of questions. And you should look at a ratio on back to my 3 to 1. I think in any good conversation, you're
Okay.
listening. So 60, 70%, you should be listening, not speaking.
Mm-hmm.
You should be learning.
Okay.
You should be
Yes.
curious. You should be
Right.
interested in them. You should not be
Okay.
sucking the oxygen out of the zip code, explaining why you're fabulous. You're there to learn
Exactly.
about them and their business needs, and then
Right.
tailor response, because you'll get so much great information when you ask
Yep.
them questions and you learn. You can then tailor what exactly in your background is a fit, but you won't know
Mm-hmm.
that unless you really listen and ask
Right.
questions.
It's going to be tricky.
That's very helpful. And of course, you don't have to give them all the answers right there. In fact, probably better not to. You can say, well, let me think about that and get back to you. That'll ensure a foot in the door later. But okay, so okay, so we have some questions that are coming in. I do want to be mindful of our time. I want to get those in. There are so many other questions that came in before, but a lot of the people who are looking have at least had nonprofit board experience. And some people have worked in nonprofits and have skills that are more typical of the nonprofit arena, like fundraising. And so if the nonprofit board people and the people who come from nonprofits have fundraising skills, does that translate to other kinds of skills in the for-profit area? It's a question that we got right now, but also we've gotten it in the past. And I wondered, how do
So
you make that connection, if you can?
I think that nonprofit backgrounds, you've served on a nonprofit board, is valuable, particularly in the fundraising area, because
Okay.
fundraising is communicating a concept,
Okay.
branding the nonprofit that you work for, developing a funnel or pipeline of potential donors. So that's a sales and marketing skill set that ought to be applicable. So I do think there's value in that. I think that's valuable. And I think all corporations today are concerned about environmental, social, governance, and sustainability. And depending on the nonprofit, you can relate that into.
Okay, great. That's really helpful because I think almost everybody that comes to us has nonprofit board experience. And we have probably about 10 to 20% of the people who have had at least some experience working in the nonprofit area. Um, let's talk about associations for a minute. It's digressing a little bit, but are there any good associations that you think people should join here that are helpful in terms of the networking part? And then I also want to hear from you about some things that you volunteered earlier about mistakes people make on their first board seat. Let's say you get the gig. Let's talk about early steps there. So first of all, associations, like there are a lot of them out there right now. Should people be joining them and going to cocktail parties? And there are some associations that won't let you join unless you're on a board. So can you tell us a little bit about that landscape?
Yes, I do think it's valuable to join associations, and I think
Okay.
you get a lot out of it. So the ones that strike me as really directly valuable are the National Association of Corporate Directors.
Okay.
Is a great resource, and I think they're very strong. There's I think things like for first-time directors, there's the Athena Alliance, which really helps you get your first board opportunity, and lines you up. Typically, they tend to do mostly private venture capital and private equity-backed boards, but they really do help with that. I talked to you a little bit about the advisory cloud when you set up all your social media channels, your website, your LinkedIn, your Twitter, how you keep everything organized, up to date and current, and get your content that you create and curate propagated across all your channels. I think women corporate directors is a good one. There's a long list, and there's probably 150 to 350, and the more the better. I think it's developing this pipeline, this concept of a funnel of leads and relationships and helping others and asking for others to help you after you've proven yourself. So I think that that's valuable.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful. I also want to hear your thoughts on the kind. Let's say you're on a board now. You've made connection and gotten through the interview process. What kinds of things do people do right and wrong as new board members? Maybe they probably do some, really great things right too, because they're adding fresh perspectives. But maybe missteps, and then maybe could you talk and maybe add on to that a little bit? I know that in your book you make the point about how to be an effective board member. Can you talk about that too? Not just the mistakes or maybe the good things that new board members make. Just how do you be really effective?
Sure. So how to be a really effective board member and some common mistakes. So here are the common mistakes that you could easily avoid.
Okay.
Think of a board meeting like a baseball game. We all know there's 9 innings in a baseball game. If you're a baseball player for the New York Mets, you get up to bat how many times in 9 innings? 3, 4, that's it. That's how many times you ought to speak. Do not just speak up and chime in to say, oh, good point. Oh, great idea. No, be quiet. If you're not moving the conversation forward, it is not necessary. Everybody sees you are there in attendance. So, and they appreciate that you're there to listen and learn in the early, 2 or 3 meetings, 1 to 2 to 3 meetings. It's perfectly reasonable not to be chiming in. I think the big mistake that really, really is the thing you ought to avoid is the difference between oversight and overstep. So oversight is the role of the board to look at what management is advocating and recommending and have discussion around that. Overstep is when you tell management what to do, when you meet with people who report to the CEO without prior review and approval, and you don't, or you meet with someone, the CEO says, sure, go ahead and come in early and meet with my head of manufacturing, and then you give that head of manufacturing a list of ideas. Oh my goodness, that's not good. That's yeah. You are not operating, you are a board member. So you're there to mentor, learn, listen, not to give directives or priorities. Now, those are the bad things. Here are the great things that you're going to do, because you're all going to be awesome board members. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to, of course, read the board package. You're going to have, on your own, gone out in the marketplace and read what the analysts are saying. You'll have listened, if it's a public company, to your CEO's earnings report. You might have listened to the competitive company's earnings reports. You're going to read all of the info on the market that the company is in, the industry that you can find. Maybe there's specific industry information that you'll get from the broad strategy companies like McKinsey and Accenture and Boston Consulting Group, but there's also probably industry-specific stuff so that you're knowledgeable. You bring an informed frame of reference, but remember, we're in mostly absorb, listen, learn for our first 2 or 3 meetings, but we come prepared so that you can add value. And you should be thinking like the CEO. Your head goes on the pillow. You're a thought partner. What is the CEO worried about? What issues is she or he dealing with? And how could I be a thought partner to help her or him move the business forward? That's the mindset of a great director.
Okay. I think that's very helpful. I think I do want to try to get some more of the questions that have come in answered. And I get that we get this question a lot too. A fair amount of the people who are ready to go on a board search are on the off-ramp, the corporate off-ramp. And by the time they launch their search, they are not holding a full-time job. Or maybe they have left a job on good terms, most likely, and they are now, for whatever reason, wanting to consider this sitting on a board. Is that an obstacle if you don't have a full-time job to getting a board seat? I mean, you have to, is there more explaining involved, or would they rather see someone working full-time and sitting on a board, which seems like it's a really hard thing to do because they're both really demanding. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think that both paths are equally attractive to prospective boards. Prospective boards are kind of, I would say more or less even in terms of, it's not a negative that you're full-time employed, and many see it as a positive. On the other hand, probably equally half of them are worried that you're not going to make the meetings and you don't have the time and you can't put the energy. So I don't think it's one way or the other. Both are valuable, and it's where you are in your career journey. So let's say you've been in your role at your multinational for 12 years as, you know, the global head of sales. You're the chief revenue officer. And, you know, you've been doing it for a long time. The company is performing well. You know, it's fine that you're still enrolled. It won't be a negative. You know, if this is a company that is a rocket ship and growing at an extraordinary rate, people will likely be worried, or if you're a new enroll. So I think that there's always nuances on it. Both are great.
Great. So helpful to know. Such a common question too. I think I really wish we could get to all of the questions here, but let me just ask you this. Should people just look for public boards? What do you think about private boards? Are they a good first step, or maybe you shouldn't see them as a first step? They may even be a harder kind of company board to serve on. I don't know. Tell us a little bit about that public-private, you know, the difference, and, you know, what's maybe best for a first-time board member. I don't know. Does it make a difference?
So for a first-time board member, there are the private board option, both venture capital and private equity, as well as the public board option. And I think all are very valuable. I think that it's harder to get on a public board for the first time if you've never been on any for-profit corporate board. So I actually think there's a lot of value and benefit to focusing on venture capital-backed private boards and private equity-backed private boards. I think they're extremely valuable. I think you learn a lot. And in fact, you have oftentimes deeper strategic discussions. You're not spending time on corporate hygiene, brushing the corporate teeth. You know, the committee work is not as big a part. So I think all three are very, very valid areas of deep focus. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you could have a simultaneous, you know, three-pronged parallel approach and go for it.
Yeah. Okay. There's no one way, is what I'm hearing. So these venture capital and private equity firms have come up so many times now. I mean, how do you connect with them? What's the best way? I mean, you mentioned ecosystems before, lawyers. I mean, like, what's the best way in the door? I mean, you could go on the internet. There's so many of them who are advertised there or have websites, but is there a good way to make a connection with a partner there, a managing partner that might, you know, you might interest in having you work on their boards?
So let's think about, how would you go about connecting to venture capital and private equity? I would do your research on the firm, and now many of these firms, I would guess a good chunk, maybe 25, 30% of them, and there's a lot of them out there in private equity and venture capital, have internal in-house talent and resource groups. So for example, you could look at a company like, we're in New York area, Insight Venture Capital. They are late stage venture capital, what they call last money in growth capital. They have an in-house resource group led by fabulous woman, Hillary Gosher. So, you know, she looks at finding people to go on boards of directors and advisory boards that we didn't even talk about. And she also builds groups of people who might be able to coach portfolio companies. Let's say you're a public CFO, and you might be able to coach the CFOs in her private portfolio companies. There's about 70 of them at Insight Ventures. So there are in-house talent groups. So do your research on the firm. See if there's an in-house talent group in either venture or private equity. There frequently is. And then also look at their areas of investment and go back and map it to your background. So there are firms that specialize in investing in financial services, in healthcare, in digitally born e-commerce companies, and match your experience and map it to where they invest, because then you have something to offer. Do your homework.
Okay. Well, Betsy, this has certainly been really interesting and very helpful, and I really appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we're at time, and boy, you actually alluded to a number of things that we would love to talk more about. Advisory boards, that's a whole new area, I think, but there are other topics that we could have gotten into. Thank you so much for your time and for the book. It is a great book. You can certainly, I know you can get it on Amazon, but it goes into a lot of other aspects. Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for dialing in. And to those who missed it, it'll be on a replay. And we'll see you soon, I hope, on campus next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.